Right. So warm greetings to you, colleagues, and I welcome you to our first official lecture session for AUI 4861 in the 2025 academic year. My name is Mr. Privilege, and I'm the tutor with Grad that would be facilitating you colleagues throughout this 2025 academic year. So previously, we had an orientation session whereby I began to discuss in form of a class discussion, assignment 2, question 1 primarily. That was for the 2024 academic year. So we're looking at question 1 of that particular question. So what you would discover if you go to tutorial letter 102 for the 2024 academic year, the lecturer, what she did then, they combined rather assignments 2 for AUI 4861, for 4862, as well as for 4863 into one document, right? So, of course, for 4861, really, you just needed to use the information that was given to you in the system description in order to answer the required sections, as it were, from the assignment questions. So if you recall well, I began to give guidance to say this is the approach one should use when it comes to addressing essay-based type of questions. So one of the pointers that I highlighted to you guys was that when you get an essay-based question, you need to start off by looking at the required part of the question as your starting point, or rather as your point of departure for any essay-based questions that you would ever get in auditing. That should always be your starting point. So in this context, question 1 was asking us to explain the instances of non-adherence to the recommended practices outlined in the King 4 report, right? Just a second. So they wanted us to explain instances of non-adherence to the recommended practices outlined in the King 4 report on corporate governance of South Africa 2016, relating to number 1, the composition of the governing body, or what we call the board of directors of a company. And then in question B, to also explain the instance of non-adherence and the recommended practices, therefore, non-adherence to the recommended practices, but of course, in this case, pertaining to the composition and the sufficiency of the board committees. So from that orientation session, that was session 1, video, or rather part 3 of that engagement, we had already begun to look into the dynamics around question 1 in terms of the instances of non-adherence, right? So what I would just do is a quick overview, and to make sure that we are on the same page, I'll just quickly start off from the beginning and then read through the system description, so as for us to answer part B of question 1, because part A we've already concluded on it in the previous session that we dealt with from the orientation side of things. So now, if you go through the background information, we are told construction is one of the largest industries globally and is currently transforming. Delta Development and Construction Limited, hereafter referred to as Delta Development, is a company that specializes in renting out construction tools to developers. So we denoted that as background information for one of the following reasons, which I've already outlined here for you. So number 1, I pointed that just as a background information because we are getting information really explaining the type of the audit client in context, what nature of business that this organization is engaging in, and we also see the type of industry or trade sector which they are operating under. So clearly, it's a construction organization, but really in the sense of leasing out or renting out construction equipment or tools to developers. That's what this organization does. But of course, still really within the construction sector. Now, that was just purely background information. And then as we read further, they begin to then explain to us the composition of the board itself and the other board committees that are in existence within this organization. So while checking the integrated reports of the company, you came across the company's disclosure on the JSE listed composition of the governing body and its committees. From the various notes and commentaries on the annual report, you were able to extract the following information relating to the governing body and its committees. So this is the information that you were able to extract. So the following list consists of the board of directors. So we had Themba Mamba, who was the non-executive chairperson and retired CEO of Delta Development for 2 years, and holds an MSc Mechanical Engineering qualification. We then also saw that there was another candidate member there, Victorian Lohu, who happens to be the CEO currently of that organization in question. And then there was Karabu Modisha, who was holding the position of Chief Financial Officer, and there's a CA designation in front of a name. And then there was Benjamin Siflobo, the Operations Director, who happens to be also a mechanical engineer by profession. And then there was Shan Reddy, the Human Resource Director, Patricia Lee, Marketing Director, Mark Liru, Non-Executive Director, Daniel Crompton, and Abigail Siflobo, right? All these are the listed individuals that formed part of the governing body or the board of directors structure of this particular organization. And we see, of course, in what capacity that they hold these positions as directors within this company. So if you recall well, we did point it out in terms of the composition of the board, cases or instances of non-adherence. And what we did is we pointed them out as problem areas. And it's something that we've already discussed. So I wouldn't want to repeat on what we've already emphasized. Perhaps what I'll just do is to give you guys a reference to video 3 of the orientation video, right? So we have already gone through that. So hence we went through, for instance, the note 1, note 2, note 3. So all of these notes that we have there really pertained primarily regarding to question A of this particular question, which was to do with the composition of the governing body, right? So then, but I want to draw your attention to this statement shortly below note number 3, which says the company has 3 board committees, which is namely the audit committee, the remuneration committee, and the social and ethics committee. So those are the current board committees that are in existence within this particular organization. And if we go back to the required section, remember they also wanted you to comment, you know, regarding to the composition of those board committees, whether they are adhering to the requirements of, or rather to the recommendation practices outlined in the King 4 report pertaining to the composition as well as the sufficiency of the board committees. So what I did, as you can see within this footnote, I've indicated what, the number of board committees that the King 4 report recommends an organization to establish. So there's supposed to be at least 5 board committees in total, according to the recommendation of the King 4 report on corporate governance. So number 1, there has to be an audit committee. Second, there has to be a nomination committee, followed by the risk committee, social and ethics committee, as well as the remuneration committee. If you go, the point of reference, obviously, for this, it will be either you can look into it from the audit notes, which is also commonly known as Jackson and Stan's textbook, chapter 4, particularly between principle 6 to principle 8 of the King 4 report. So that part, obviously, it really explains in detail regarding to not only the composition of the various board committees, but it also explains the composition of the governing body corporately, right? Which is what we already did in that video 3, or rather part 3 of the orientation video, right? So if you go to principle 8 now, I'm directing you to that because of what we are about to discuss pertaining to question B, right? So if you go to principle 8 of the King 4 report herein, it deals with details regarding to the composition of those board committees, right? So this is principle 8 under section 2 of the King 4 report on corporate governance. So principle 8 deals with the committees of the board. So in other words, it also explains to you the composition of all these individual respective board committees, which a company is recommended to have according to the King 4 report. So hence, if you look here, principle 8, committees of the board is titled, the board should ensure that its arrangements for delegation within its own structures promote independent judgment and assist with the balance of power and the effective discharge of its duties. How? When we have structures such as the audit committee in place, the nominations committee in place, when you have the risk governance committee in place, remuneration committee, and lastly, social and ethics committee. These are the recommended board committees according to the King 4 report. Now, you find in certain instances, an organization can have more board committees, apart from these particular ones that you can see now. I mean, depending on the nature of business in question or in context, some they have financial committees, you know, in their board corporate structures, depending on what they need to establish or what they need to achieve over a certain duration of time. So they can have maybe a particular committee in place within their governance structures, but only for a certain period of time, in certain instances. So it might not be because they want to have it over a permanent basis, right? I mean, there was an organization I was working for. They used to have, you know, an audit committee, but it's more something to do with the finance committee, really. So that particular committee, it was established for handling certain, you know, threshold of certain amounts that the organization was receiving. So something of that sort. So you would have that over and above these board committees recommended by the King 4 report, an organization can have more board committees depending on their needs and nature of business that they are carrying out. But these particular ones, these specific ones, the 5 that I've outlined, these are the ones recommended in terms of the King 4 report on corporate governance. So if you go, for instance, to page 4/32, we go straight to page 4/32, it introduces you to the composition of the audit committee. So what is important when you go through each one of these respective board committees is to take note of the composition of each one of those board committees, right? Why is it so important? Is because it helps you to then be capacitated enough to identify those instances of non-adherence. Why? Because if you know what is what composition makes up an audit committee, you can then align that to the given circumstances within the governance structure of the audit committee in this organization. So, like, for instance, let me just maybe read it out. So if you look at the audit committee, right, it is made up, they say here, Victoria Ndlovu is the chairperson with all members of the governing body serving on the audit committee. So essentially what this person is saying to us is that all these enlisted members of the board of directors, they are all actually participants, or rather they are members to the audit committee. And we see Victoria Ndlovu being the chairperson, right? So which is giving us a hint to have to mention or perhaps to comment regarding to that aspect regarding to the position that she carries. So if you look at Victoria Ndlovu in this instance, she's a CEO in this organization, right? meaning to say this individual is an executive director in her capacity. And then we need to then go back to the drawing board to look into the composition of the audit committee and how it is supposed to be established. So if you look at the composition, I've already summarized it, but I mean, I can still read it off from here as well. So here's what I picked up. Okay, this is just me summarizing what the audit committee really entails, what it is. So in the audit committee, it's one of the highest level of authority within an organization. And secondly, it's one of the regarded as independent committee within the organizational governance structures, in the sense that all the members, rather, they are not supposed to be involved, or rather they are not involved in the day-to-day activities of the organization. So that's where the independency element comes in. But obviously there are other issues or other factors that need to be taken into consideration to determine whether certain individuals are indeed independent or perhaps not, like in the case which we have with Victoria and Logo. And then number three, all right, one of their responsibilities to review as well as to assess integrity of financial reporting of the business entity. Why? To ensure reliable, whether these financial statements are reliable for use by interested parties. And these interested parties can involve shareholders, potential investors in the company, creditors, and regulators, etc., just to name a few. So this was just me explaining to you guys what the audit committee really is, in a nutshell, when you look at it as part of the board committees in the company, right? So now, what is the composition of the audit committee according to the King 4 report? Number one, there are actually four elements pertaining to the composition of the audit committee. So number one, all the members of the audit committee should be independent, non-executive directors. I want to highlight something here. They are all supposed to be what? Independent, non-executive directors. Not one, all of them actually. That's one of the requirements. And number two, the audit committee should consist of how many members at least? Minimum at least 3. Meaning to say there can be more than 3 members in the audit committee structures. But minimum, they have to be 3 members at most. Number 3, the board should...
Sorry,
yes. Yes.
So meaning the number of the audit committee members is dependent on the size of the organization.
Yes, it's also pertinent on the size of the organization. So the larger it becomes, the more members you might potentially have, in order to have more heads to handle, the volume of work that may need to be administered.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. And number 3, the board should appoint, notice, an independent non-executive director as the chairperson. That's another requirement regarding to the composition. And lastly, the members of the audit committee should, as a whole, have the necessary financial literacies, skills, and experience to execute their duties effectively. So in other words, they need to be versed in the knowledge of accounting, taxation, audits, and stuff, and cost management accounting as well, so to speak. So now, those are the 4 primary recommendations when it comes to the composition of the audit committee. So if we go into our scenario, right, one of the things we are already told concerning the audit committee is that there is Victoria Ndlovu, who is also the capacity of a CEO in this company, who is chairperson to this committee, and all the other members of the governing body are serving in the audit committee. So we need to comment on that, right? To point out the instances of non-adherence to the King 4 report. So I think for the interest of time, instead of me writing those instances down, I can try to maybe explain or point them out in short, and then I can explain them. So clearly, point number 1 that you can see regarding to the audit committee, if you look at the chairperson, All right. So the first point it has to do so I'm enlisting the instances of non-adherence. So the first aspect it has to do with the chairperson. All right. So let me just do it this way. So inadequate composition of the audit committee. Why are we saying there's an adequate composition of the audit committee? Number one, it has to do with the chairperson. So the current chairperson is also serving as the CEO, right? In this organization. So I'm just going to, like I said, I'm going to put this in short. So the current chairperson, is also serving as the CEO within the organization. Therefore, her responsibilities, her independency is impaired, which ultimately affects her objectivity to perform her duties and responsibilities as chairperson to the audit committee. So that's one of the points that you would need to enlist as a case or an instance of non-adherence. That has to do with the current chairperson in this organization, right? And then let's talk about now we want to address the members, right? So that's another part that we need to also address, members. So the King 4 report recommends that the audit committee should consist of at least 3 members. Now we see there are more than 3 members in this case. That's not the problem. But the problem is these members, not all of them are independent non-executive directors, because one of the recommendations is that all the members of the audit committee should be independent non-executive directors. Now, if I observe the composition of this governing structure, the first person that is table for there is a non-executive chairperson and retired CEO of Delta Development for 2 years. So this is the chairperson to the governing body. Now, a chairperson to the governing body cannot be a member of the audit committee. That's what the King 4 stipulates. And where do we find that information? It's part of Principle 7. So I want to quickly show that to you over here, paragraph 6 of Principle 7 on corporate governance. So here's what it says. The chairperson should not be a what? Here it is. Should not be a member of the audit committee. This chairperson that they are referring to is the chairperson to the overall board of directors of this organization, or it's the chairperson of the governing body of the organization, which is a separate individual to the person that is referred to as the chairperson to the audit committee in this instance. Because remember, if you look at the composition of the audit committee, there's need for them to appoint an independent non-executive director as a chairperson, which they've already done, and that appears in this case to be Victoria Ndlovu. And hence I've mentioned about the chairperson that there's a problem regarding to the person holding that position. Why? Because the current chairperson to the audit committee is also the CEO of this organization. And as such, that automatically impairs the independency of this individual to serve in the capacity as chairperson to this organization. And then the other point you need to mention regarding to so it can be to members either, then you start to deal with them individually. But also another one, it has to do with the chairperson. This one, it will be separate, chairperson of the governing body. Chairperson of the governing body. So the chairperson of the governing body, obviously, it is Victoria Ndlovu. So you also, it is this individual, Teboho Mamba. You need to mention something about that individual. So you can say that the chairperson of the governing body should not be a member of the audit committee. However, in this case, it appears that the chairperson also forms part of audit committee members. Does it make sense? Is it making sense? Yes. So that's what you needed to mention.
Yes, it is.
Oh, wonderful. So that's what you needed to mention concerning Utebo Homamba. Then if you go to Victoria and Ndlovu, we've already addressed it. Then let's look at Karabo Modisha. Karabo Modisha should not be a member to the audit committee, given that Karabo is an executive director in the capacity as the chief financial officer of the organization. So definitely, and it's not just her only. It's not only Karabo in this case. It will be Karabo, Benjamin Sihlobo, Operations Director, Shan Reddy, Human Resource Director, Patricia Lee, Marketing Director. So these individuals, you classify them under one class to say they cannot be members of the audit committee, given that these are executive directors who are actively involved with the organization on a day-to-day basis, and therefore they cannot be independent. That's what you needed to mention concerning these guys. And all of that, it's really within the umbrella of members, right? Or let me just rather say here, individual members, right? So you'd mentioned that the following directors cannot be members or should not be members of the audit committee, given that they are executive directors and therefore they cannot be independent. And then when you say the following members, you need to then classify them, mention the names, Karabo Modisha, Benjamin Sitlo, even the Victoria Ndlovu as well would be part of the same group of individuals in this case. That you would mention to say these are executive directors, and as such, they should not form part of the members to the audit committee. Right. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. Okay. So another thing that, okay, what about the financial literacy? I mean, the financial literacy was not an issue, given that we have this individual, Daniel Crompton. Let me see what's happening with Daniel. Okay, Daniel Crompton, there's an issue about that individual. Let me talk about the non-executive directors. So let's see Mark Leroux in this case. Nothing mentioned further really about Mark Leroux, right? There was nothing. So Mark Leroux, although he's a non-executive director, so my issue would be Mark Leroux's independence is not clearly defined in this case. They only say that this is a non-executive director, so we can presume that Mark Leroux is independent. We can presume, but it's not clearly stipulated to us whether indeed this individual is independent of the organization in this case. I don't know if it's making some sense to you. But it might, in this case, I wouldn't say that it might, I mean, I wouldn't say that it raises instances or case of non-adherence per se regarding to Mark Leroux, right? What I could maybe state just as a comment, rather, it would be to say, given that this individual holds, the MBA qualification, they can contribute positively to the audit committee, given the vast experience that they may possess, the industry experience rather, that they may possess, given, of course, I mean, that kind of qualification, you'll be exposed to the company on all round, like in all aspects, really. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what I would say, that's what I would have said concerning Mark Leroux. But then with regards to Daniel Crompton, what do you see about Daniel Crompton there? I don't think really their audit committee is proper. It's not adequately structured. It's really not, eh? And with regards to Teboho again, you see Teboho who also is a member, besides him being the chairperson to the governing body, but also for the fact that he was, his tenure of retirement from position of CEO, it has not lapsed more than 3 years. It's only about 2 years. That alone also explains why he is not independent at all in this case to discharge responsibilities as a member to the audit committee. You can also point that out as well. Right. I think that's pretty much it.
So
Yes.
so you can be a member of a committee of different committees in the same organizations.
Yeah, it is possible that one person can be in different board committees of the same organization. It's very much possible. So somebody can be a member of the audit committee and can also be in the nominations committee, for example. There are instances like that. And you see this guy, the chairperson, he can also, okay, there are certain board committees he can participate in, and there are some that he's restricted or she's restricted to be a member to. For instance, the audit committee, he should not be a member, and he should not chair, notice he should not chair the remuneration committee, but is allowed to become a member there in the remuneration committee. I'm talking of the chairperson of the governing body. And another thing, this same individual is mandated, or rather required, to be a member of the nominations committee. So do you see that these are two different board committees altogether, in which one individual is participating as a member? You see?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So it's possible to be in different committees within the same organization. That was really just the point I was trying to put across using these examples. And notice the same individual can also be a member, may be a member to the risk committee as well, and may be a member to the social and ethics committee, but should not be the chairperson. So in other words, the governing body chairperson is allowed to be in any of these other 4 committees, but is not allowed to be a member to the audit committee at all. In some of those committees in which he or she is allowed to be a member, in some of them, she or he can be allowed to be the chairperson, but in some, the individual is not allowed to be the chairperson there. Like what we saw with the remuneration committee, is not allowed to be a chairperson there. And also
the nomination
committee. Pardon me?
I'm saying, but they can be a chairperson on the nomination committee.
And the risk committee as well, yeah. They can be allowed to be chairpersons in the 2 nominations and the risk committee. So far so good?
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so now if we go back to our question, so now I think as far as the audit committee is concerned, okay, let me see. I think I spoke about Markley rule. There's nothing wrong pertaining to Markley rule, so I'm not going to say anything bad about that individual. Let's see, Daniel Crompton is a non-executive director and a CA, but then the issue it has to do with him being what you call it? Okay, him being him being, sorry, a non-executive director of Sigma Pty Limited, which is also a major customer rather of Delta Development. So in this instance, the related party relations or related party relationship that is in existence That's what is going to affect Daniel Crompton's independency to perform as a member of the audit committee. So Daniel Crompton definitely is a non-executive director, clearly, but is not independent. Why? As is also a non-executive director of one of Delta developers' major customers, and it's clearly stipulated there. That's what you could have maybe pointed out concerning Daniel Crompton. Right. And then if we look at Abigail, yes, Abigail, as much as she is a non-executive director, but also what's going to affect her independency to be a member to the audit committee is the related party relations, as she's a sister of one of the board members in the company. In this case, his name is Benjamin Sihlobo. And yeah, so that third party relations, or the related party relations, it's what's going to affect Abigail's independence. So those are some of the pointers that you could have pointed out pertaining to the audit committee. So we're left with a minute. So what we need to do, we can reconnect again using the same links, and then I'll just proceed to address the remuneration committee and the social and ethics committee, and we are done.
Okay.
Brilliant.